This is the most explosive performance by Chuck in the classic American TV show Better Call Saul, and simultaneously the most embarrassing moment of his life. Because Chuck couldn't control his emotions, he blurted out years of pent-up grievances against his brother in court. By the time he realized it, he wished he could find a hole to crawl into. Even more embarrassing was that the thing Chuck least wanted Rebecca to know was ultimately exposed. He hid at home, sinking into depression, and refused to open the door even when Rebecca came knocking. Meanwhile, Jimmy's painstaking efforts paid off with the best possible outcome. His law license was not revoked but only suspended for a year. During this year, he is barred from engaging in any legal work. If he causes any more trouble, his law license will be permanently revoked. Jimmy and Kim celebrated at their WM law firm. At that moment, someone suddenly knocked on the door. It was Rebecca seeking Jimmy's help. Rebecca was very worried about Chuck, who had shut himself off from the world, and she wanted Jimmy to visit Chuck and persuade him to come out. However, Jimmy, having seen through Chuck, declared that he had severed ties with his brother. Hearing this, Rebecca angrily retorted that Chuck's illness was understandable, but what was Jimmy's excuse? After saying that, Rebecca turned and left. Jimmy's refusal officially marked the end of his relationship with Chuck. That evening, Howard brought a bottle of fine wine to visit Chuck, but Chuck, still distressed, didn't want to see anyone. Howard stated that if Chuck didn't open the door, he would sit outside and wait. Reluctantly, Chuck finally opened the door. The bottle was a valuable 1966 wine, a treasured piece from Howard's personal collection. Now, the only person who could help Chuck was Howard. Howard informed Chuck of Jimmy's judgment, saying that a one-year suspension was also a kind of victory. Moreover, given Jimmy's character, he was likely to violate the Bar Association's rules again within the year, which would lead to his permanent disbarment. But Chuck remained sullen. Howard advised Chuck that Jimmy wasn't worth all this trouble and suggested that Chuck move on and focus on the future. Continuing like this would be a waste of his time and talent. Chuck also realized that if he didn't get his act together, he was really done for.
To new beginnings. To new beginnings.
Howard drove off after the drinks. After Howard left, Chuck downed the remaining wine in his glass. Then he took out a recorder from a drawer and removed the batteries, bravely challenging his fear of electromagnetic fields. Meanwhile, because of his suspension, Jimmy began calling his clients one by one to explain the situation. With Jimmy's efficiency, it took him only a short while to reach the last client on his list. Coincidentally, this client was a retired veteran, because previously, when Jimmy shot an ad, he had used a military bomber as a background for free. After the matter was exposed, he was held accountable. This reminded Jimmy that his ads on the TV station also needed to be suspended, so he quickly contacted the service staff at the TV station.
Get me the manager. Then get me somebody who can pull a commercial, stat.
But to Jimmy's surprise, there were still 9 more scheduled airings according to the contract. Jimmy owed them $4,000, and there was no option for a refund or resale. He asked Kim to find loopholes in the contract, but Kim, already overwhelmed with the Mesa Verde Bank case, said she didn't have time to look into it, since Jimmy had temporarily lost his job. It also meant he had no income. Kim suggested they could fire their assistant Francesca because she could handle filing documents or making coffee herself. However, Jimmy didn't want to fire Francesca. He thought she was flexible and worked well with him. Even in Breaking Bad, Saul continued to employ Francesca. Jimmy promised Kim that even if he was out of work, he would find a way to cover half of the firm's expenses. He said he could consider closing the firm only if he truly couldn't come up with the money someday. Seeing Jimmy's determination, Kim didn't insist further. Next, Jimmy started thinking of ways to resolve the TV ad issue. He approached a carpet store owner, Pop, to pitch his ad business. Jimmy said that for just $4,900, he could produce 9 ads for free and air them during prime time on a popular radio station. Pop thought it sounded good, but when Jimmy asked when Pop wanted to place the order, Pop said he needed to wait until next week. Hearing this, Jimmy wasn't pleased. He suggested that Pop should shoot the ad now and complete it by 3:20 p.m. Jimmy didn't want to miss out on today's advertising opportunity. Pop thought that producing an ad in such a short time would result in poor quality. Jimmy assured him he had a complete editing, splicing, and color correction process, but Pop still didn't believe Jimmy's promise. Ultimately, Jimmy's attempt was unsuccessful. With just 2 hours left before his ad slot, Jimmy would lose $400 if he didn't find another ad to fill the space. Usually quick-witted, Jimmy suddenly felt at a loss. Finding a paying client to shoot an ad and getting it broadcast on TV in such a short time seemed like an impossible task. At this moment, the makeup girl behind him had an idea.
Maybe you could make a commercial.
Have you not been listening? That's what I've been trying. Oh, right.
She successfully reminded Jimmy that he could shoot a recruitment ad to fill the slot himself. Jimmy hurriedly drove to the TV station's lot, knowing that filming the ad there and communicating on-site would be the most efficient. However, considering he had previously appeared in ads as a lawyer, it would be a conflict for him to now appear in a recruitment ad. So, Jimmy decided to write a script and have the makeup girl help. Jimmy asked the makeup girl to do a test read of the script, but he felt she lacked conviction.
For a limited time, we'll shoot your commercial today and have it on air tomorrow.
I thought you were like president of the drama club or something.
I'm treasurer.
Next, Jimmy asked the sound guy to read it, but he couldn't deliver the lines smoothly either. One look at the cameraman's appearance, and Jimmy decided he was a definite no-go. After some thought, Jimmy decided to do it himself, knowing he was naturally suited for it. Jimmy's ad turned out to be as explosive as ever. That evening, he received calls from several clients wanting him to shoot ads. Kim was very curious about how Jimmy managed to drum up business again. Jimmy recounted the day's events in detail to Kim. Learning that Jimmy could produce such an effective ad on the fly, Kim couldn't wait to see the original footage. Jimmy felt the ad wasn't that great and didn't want to show Kim, but under Kim's persistent persuasion, Jimmy finally played the ad.
What's that I see? Albuquerque's next TV star? It's you, small business owner, struggling to make it in today's fast-paced economy? Look at you. You're a triple threat. Great services, great products, and most of all, that face. You're a star. Wrap it all up in your natural charisma and bam, you belong on TV. Better watch out for autograph hounds and paparazzi. And it gets better. I can have you on the air tomorrow. You heard me right. Tomorrow. Better get ready to be famous, Albuquerque. I can make you a TV star for a price you can afford. Call me, Saul Goodman. The world needs to know about you and your business. Call me now.
Kim was stunned after watching it. She discovered that Jimmy had given himself a new name, Saul Goodman.
Saul Goodman.
At that moment, Jimmy didn't think much of the name, not realizing it would become an indelible part of his identity for the rest of his life. The reason the Breaking Bad series is considered a classic is not only because of the outstanding performances by the main characters but also because every supporting character is vividly portrayed. This has led many viewers to continue watching for the sake of the supporting cast. In Breaking Bad, Saul appeared as a supporting character, and his humorous performance was loved by the audience. The director decided to write a prequel to Breaking Bad with Saul as the main character. Thus, the first season of Better Call Saul began airing in 2015, and the final season concluded in 2022. The average rating for the entire series has surpassed that of its predecessor, Breaking Bad. Of course, the supporting characters in this spin-off are also quite remarkable. Do you think the writers might choose another character from this series to create another hit? Today, we will focus on the main supporting characters of this show. In previous episodes, Gus and Mike worked together to disrupt Hector's secret transportation route, which directly caused a significant decline in Hector's operations. Additionally, due to Hector's arrogant nature, the boss Don began favoring Gus's transportation route. This sparked Hector's jealousy towards Gus, prompting him to force Gus to help him transport goods. Hector thought he had succeeded, not realizing he was stepping into Gus's trap. One day, Hector sent his subordinate Nacho to collect the contraband provided by the boss with Gus's men. Don provided 11 packages in total, 5 for Hector and 6 for Gus. This showed that Don valued Gus more than Hector, but Nacho took 6 packs of the contraband. Seeing the deadlock, Tyrus had to report to his boss, Gus. Gus told Tyrus to give Nacho the package. He didn't care about the minor loss. At that time, Gus was inspecting a factory up for sale, secretly planning to build his commercial empire. The place he was inspecting was the laundromat where Walter worked in Breaking Bad, and the one introducing it was Lydia, a female executive from the German company Madrigal. In Breaking Bad, Lydia was also an important character. The plan to hijack the methylamine by the Walter, Jesse, and Mike team was her idea. From the 3rd season onwards, Better Call Saul started intertwining with the plot and characters of Breaking Bad, making the show increasingly exciting. Most viewers of Better Call Saul have watched Breaking Bad. After completing his task, Nacho reported back to Hector. Hector was very curious about Gus's reaction and felt smug, thinking he might have scared Gus. This clearly showed that Hector's intelligence was not on the same level as Gus's, which destined him to end up as a loser before Gus. Hector called Nacho not just to get a work report from him, but because he had something important to tell Nacho. He found out that Nacho's father, Manuel, runs an auto upholstery shop and gets his supplies from Mexico. Hector planned to use Manuel's supply route as a cover for his own business. Hearing this, Nacho, who had always followed orders, gently refused his boss for the first time. He didn't want his family involved in this industry. Moreover, his father was honest and upright, and he would never comply with Hector's arrangements. Nacho wanted to continue making excuses to refuse, but Hector had already made his decision, leaving Nacho no choice. At that moment, Arturo reported that Tuco had caused trouble again in prison. Hearing this, Hector's blood pressure soared, triggering his chronic heart condition. He hurriedly pulled out his medicine, but accidentally dropped a pill. Seeing this, Nacho quickly got up, pretending to help Hector, but actually hiding the capsule under his foot. He was starting to plan to kill Hector to protect his father. After taking his medicine and calming down, Hector directly ordered Nacho to persuade his father. After Hector left, Nacho looked at his life-saving capsule and then went to Price's house. Given their previous unpleasant collaboration, Price thought Nacho was there to extort him again. Nacho straightforwardly asked Price if he could get such capsules. Price hesitated for a moment and said he could. Nacho offered a price Price couldn't refuse, $20,000 for a few empty capsule shells. To ensure a safe transaction, Price approached Mike, hoping he would continue being his bodyguard. But Mike, not needing money and wanting to avoid trouble, flatly refused Price's request. When Price mentioned his trading partner was Nacho, Mike stopped and asked what Nacho wanted to buy. Price said it was an empty capsule that looked like heart medication, and Nacho had paid him a lot of money. Mike suggested Price find an excuse to cancel the deal. Price, thinking Mike was dissatisfied with the payment, immediately raised the offer to $3,000. Seeing that this idiot still didn't get his point, Mike angrily turned and left.
But not interested.
Lately, Mike had been attending community support group meetings with his daughter-in-law, where he heard a neighbor share the story of her missing husband. This reminded Mike of the innocent civilian who died because he robbed Hector's truck, and he imagined his family was also worried about him. Although Mike had secretly punished Hector, it hadn't brought him peace. To find the body Hector had buried, he decided to get useful information from Nacho, so Mike contacted Price and agreed to be his bodyguard. Mike's purpose was to engage with Nacho because Mike had previously tried to kill Hector but was secretly monitored by Gus. Mike guessed that Nacho was buying the drug from Price to kill Hector, so he kindly warned Nacho not to do it. Based on his experience of being monitored by Gus, Mike opened Nacho's gas tank to check for a tracker before he was reassured. When he learned that Nacho was doing this for his father, Mike advised Nacho that if he succeeded and didn't get shot in the head, he should quickly switch the pills back to avoid detection. Before the deal, Mike asked Nacho for the location where they had buried the civilian's body. The next day, Mike went to the US-Mexico border based on Nacho's information. He used a metal detector to search the area and, after half a day's effort, finally found the burial site. Then Mike made an anonymous call to the police, providing them with the specific location of the buried body. Mike felt better when he thought that the innocent man could be reunited with his family. With the capsules in hand, Nacho started making fake pills at home. Afterward, he kept practicing slipping the pills into his pocket to ensure everything would go smoothly because failure would be catastrophic. At night, Nacho sabotages the air conditioning in the snack bar where they regularly collect their money. The next day, as expected, Hector took off his jacket because it was too hot and hung it on a chair. After collecting the money, Nacho pretended a bill might be counterfeit, prompting Hector to ask him to bring it over. Nacho took the opportunity to reach into Hector's jacket pocket, but unfortunately, the pill bottle wasn't in that pocket. After Hector confirmed the bill was fine, he handed it back to Nacho. To reach the other pocket, Nacho pretended to clumsily spill the money on the floor, apologizing profusely to Hector. While picking up the money, Nacho finally managed to stealthily grab the pill bottle. When no one was around, Nacho secretly swapped the pills. The sweltering weather masked the cold sweat that had broken out all over him. When he's done changing the pills, Nacho gets up and pretends to get Hector a cup of coffee. With Hector's approval, Nacho had one crucial step left. to return the pill bottle to Hector's pocket. Fortunately, after countless practices at home, Nacho perfectly slipped the pill bottle back into Hector's pocket. Once Hector was dead, no one would bother his father again. Meanwhile, Mike took out the money he had stolen from Hector. Looking at the piles of cash on the table, Mike knew that he could never earn that much money as a security guard. He needed to launder the money before he could use it, so he thought of Gus. Since Mike had a history with the Salamancas, if they found out about his cooperation with Gus, there would be serious repercussions. Mike suggested a paper transaction, but the cautious Gus still felt uneasy. Gus came up with a good solution, saying he could waive Mike's commission to solve his problem. Previously, Gus had considered hiring Mike, and their handshake this time marked the official start of their collaboration.